Have you ever found yourself somewhere unexpected and thought to yourself that it wasn't just chance? That strange feeling when life seems to arrange itself in ways too perfect to be coincidental. Perhaps you were scrolling through videos late at night, unable to sleep, your mind racing with questions about your purpose, your faith, your very existence, when suddenly this video appeared, and something inside you, something beyond rational thought, whispered that this was meant for you. This is not a random algorithm suggestion. This is not mere chance. This is something more. What if I told you that God has been orchestrating moments throughout your entire life, leading you precisely to this moment, to hear exactly what your soul has been silently searching for? What if this very second is a divine appointment that was set in motion long before you were even aware of your spiritual hunger? Saint Ignatius of Loyola understood something profound about these moments. He discovered a truth that has been hidden in plain sight for centuries. A truth that can transform how you experience every single moment of your life from this day forward. When we talk about coincidences, we're often describing those moments that seem to defy the cold calculations of probability. That job offer that came right when you needed it. That stranger whose words seemed to answer the very question your heart had been asking. That book that fell open to exactly the passage you needed to read. Our modern world trains us to see these as random occurrences, meaningless intersections in time. But Ignatius of Loyola, this 16th century soldier turned saint, experienced something that shattered this illusion of randomness forever. Lying in a bed, recovering from a cannonball wound that shattered his leg during battle, Ignatius found himself reading the only books available to him, the life of Christ and lives of the saints. It wasn't his preferred reading. He would have chosen tales of chivalry and military conquest. But in what seemed like a frustrating coincidence, these spiritual texts were his only option. And as he read, something extraordinary happened. He began to notice that when he daydreamed about courtly romance and battlefield glory, he felt an initial excitement that quickly faded to emptiness. But when he imagined himself following in the footsteps of the saints, serving God with the same fervor he once reserved for serving earthly kingdoms, a lasting peace and joy remained with him long after his thoughts had ended. In this seemingly random moment of convalescence, confined to a bed with books he would never have chosen, Ignatius discovered the foundation of what would become his spiritual exercises, a method of discernment that has guided countless souls for 5 centuries. He realized that God speaks to us through our deepest feelings, through the movements of consolation and desolation in our spirits. What appeared to be a terrible coincidence, a career-ending injury, was actually a divine appointment, a moment when God revealed to Ignatius his true calling. And this is not just the story of one man from centuries ago. This same principle is at work in your life right now. The fact that you are hearing these words at this particular moment in your journey is not random chance. It is an invitation to discover the divine thread that has been woven through every moment of your existence. Think about the most significant turning points in your own life, the unexpected encounters, the surprising opportunities, the apparent setbacks that led to new beginnings. We often attribute these to luck or coincidence. But what if there's a deeper reality at work? What if, as Ignatius discovered, God is constantly communicating with you through the ordinary events of your life? What if every moment carries a message meant specifically for you? This is the revolutionary understanding that transformed Ignatius from a vain, ambitious soldier into one of history's most influential spiritual guides. And it can transform your life just as dramatically. The insight that God is actively present and communicating in every circumstance completely reorients how we experience reality. Most of us live on the surface of our lives, reacting to events, chasing pleasures, avoiding pains, rarely pausing to ask what deeper message might be hidden within our daily experiences. We treat coincidences as curious anomalies rather than invitations to a more profound encounter. But Ignatius challenges us to see with different eyes, to develop what he called spiritual discernment, the ability to recognize God's voice speaking through the fabric of ordinary reality. I want to pause for a moment here and ask you something important. Have you ever experienced a moment that seemed too meaningful to be mere coincidence? A time when it felt as though God was reaching into your life in an unmistakable way? If you're nodding right now, I invite you to share that experience in the comments below. You can begin with the words, "I recognized God's hand when," and briefly describe that moment. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today to recognize the divine appointments in their own life. Sometimes the most powerful spiritual awakenings happen when we realize we're not alone in these experiences, when we see that God is working in similar ways across many different lives. This awareness that God is actively communicating through the circumstances of our lives is foundational to Ignatian spirituality, but it runs counter to how most of us have been taught to view reality. We've been conditioned to see the universe as either a random series of meaningless events or a rigid deterministic system where everything is mechanically predetermined. Both views effectively eliminate the possibility of a personal God who is intimately engaged with the details of human lives. Both perspectives leave us ultimately alone in the cosmos, either victims of chance or cogs in a machine. But Ignatius presents us with a radically different understanding of reality, one in which every moment is potentially sacramental, carrying the divine presence and purpose if we have eyes to see and ears to hear. The theological roots of this perspective reach deep into Christian tradition. Scripture repeatedly shows God working through seemingly random circumstances to accomplish divine purposes. Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery, an apparent disaster that eventually positions him to save nations from famine. Moses is hidden among the reeds and discovered by Pharaoh's daughter, a seeming coincidence that places him in position to eventually lead his people to freedom. Ruth happens to glean in Boaz's field, setting in motion a lineage that will eventually include King David and ultimately Jesus himself. Throughout biblical narrative, what appears as chance to human eyes is revealed as providence from God's perspective. This doesn't mean that everything is predetermined in a rigid sense that eliminates human freedom. Rather, it suggests that God is infinitely creative in weaving our free choices, even our mistakes and failures, into a larger tapestry of meaning and purpose. Saint Augustine described this divine artistry when he wrote about how God can write straight with crooked lines, bringing good even out of human error and sin. This understanding preserves both divine sovereignty and human freedom in creative tension, avoiding both the despair of a meaningless universe and the fatalism of rigid determinism. What Ignatius adds to this theological tradition is a practical method for discerning how God is communicating through the circumstances of our lives. He recognized that divine communication often comes through our internal emotional and spiritual responses, what he called movements of the soul. Consolation, feelings of peace, joy, courage, and connection often indicate alignment with God's presence and purpose. Desolation, experiences of anxiety, confusion, fear, and isolation often signal movement away from God's intention for us. By paying careful attention to these internal movements as we consider different possibilities, we can begin to sense the divine invitation hidden within our circumstances. This is not to suggest that God only speaks through positive feelings. Sometimes a holy dissatisfaction, a discomfort with the status quo, is precisely how God is calling us to growth and change. The key is learning to distinguish between different types of spiritual and emotional responses, developing what Ignatius called discernment of spirits. This discernment is not merely intellectual analysis, but a holistic awareness that integrates reason, emotion, imagination, and spiritual sensitivity. Consider how this might apply to the fact that you are watching this video right now. What series of events led you to this moment? What inner promptings made you click on this particular content rather than the countless other options available to you? What are you feeling as you listen to these words? Is there a resonance, a sense that something here is meant specifically for you? Ignatius would encourage you to pay careful attention to these questions, because they may reveal how God is actively working in your life in this very moment. The practical dimension of Ignatian spirituality is perhaps most fully expressed in his famous spiritual exercises, a structured program of prayer, meditation, and self-examination designed to help individuals discern God's will and align their lives with divine purpose. Central to these exercises is the practice of finding God in all things, developing the capacity to recognize divine presence and activity in every circumstance and encounter. One of the most powerful tools Ignatius offers is the daily exam, a simple but profound practice of prayerful reflection on the events of the day. Typically practiced in the evening, the exam invites us to review our day in God's presence, noticing moments of consolation and desolation, recognizing where we experienced God's presence and where we turned away, and discerning how God might be speaking to us through these experiences. Regular practice of the examen gradually trains us to see our lives with new eyes, to recognize the thread of divine purpose woven through even the most ordinary circumstances. The story of Ignatius himself illustrates this principle beautifully. After his conversion experience during his convalescence, he undertook a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, intending to remain there permanently. However, the Franciscan authorities in Jerusalem, concerned about his safety, required him to leave. This apparent thwarting of his plans led him back to Spain and eventually to Paris, where he gathered the companions who would form the core of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, who would go on to have an incalculable impact on education, missionary work, and spiritual formation throughout the world. What seemed like an obstacle to his spiritual aspirations was actually redirecting him toward his true vocation. The apparent coincidence of being sent away from Jerusalem was revealed as divine providence guiding him toward a much greater purpose than he could have imagined. This pattern appears repeatedly in the lives of those who have embraced Ignatian spirituality. Francis Xavier, one of Ignatius's early companions, was assigned to missionary work in India only because another Jesuit fell ill. This apparent coincidence launched one of the most remarkable missionary careers in Christian history, as Xavier went on to evangelize throughout Asia. Jean de Brebeuf, a French Jesuit, found himself assigned to missionary work among the Huron people of North America, a challenging assignment that eventually led to his martyrdom, but also to a profound inculturation of Christianity that continues to influence indigenous Catholic spirituality today. What these stories share is an openness to discovering God's purpose in unexpected circumstances. Rather than forcing their preconceived notions of how God should work in their lives, these individuals remained attentive and responsive to divine guidance as it unfolded through seemingly random events. They exemplify what it means to live with the awareness that nothing is merely coincidental, that God is constantly communicating and guiding if we have the discernment to perceive it. But what does this mean for your life, for your daily experience in our complex modern world? How can the awareness that God is working through the circumstances of your life transform how you experience your relationships, your work, your challenges, and even your apparently random encounters? Let me suggest several practical implications. First, this awareness invites us to approach each day with a sense of expectancy, alert to how God might be communicating with us through the people we meet, the challenges we face, and the opportunities that arise. Rather than sleepwalking through our routines or being constantly distracted by our devices, we can cultivate a contemplative attentiveness to the present moment, recognizing it as a potential bearer of divine presence and purpose. Second, this perspective transforms how we experience difficulties and apparent setbacks. When we believe that God is actively working through all circumstances for our ultimate good, we can approach challenges not merely as problems to be solved, but as invitations to growth and discovery. Like Ignatius with his cannonball wound or his expulsion from Jerusalem, what initially appears as misfortune may reveal itself as the very means by which God is guiding us toward our true purpose and deeper spiritual growth. Third, this awareness heightens our sensitivity to the sacred potential in every human encounter. If God is orchestrating the circumstances of our lives, then the people we meet, even briefly or seemingly by chance, may be divine messengers carrying exactly what we need in that moment. This transforms how we approach relationships, making us more fully present and receptive to what God might be communicating through others. Fourth, recognizing God's active communication through life circumstances gives new significance to our intuitions and inner promptings. While we should certainly test these impulses with reason and wise counsel, Ignatian spirituality encourages us to pay careful attention to the subtle movements of our hearts, the gentle nudges that may be divine guidance directing us toward unexpected opportunities or away from paths that would lead us from our true purpose. Finally, and perhaps most profoundly, this awareness that God is constantly communicating through the circumstances of our lives transforms our perception of reality itself. The world is no longer a neutral stage on which we pursue our independent goals, but a living sacrament of divine presence, every moment pregnant with meaning and purpose, specifically for us. As the Jesuit poet Gerard Manley Hopkins wrote, "The world is charged with the grandeur of God." When we truly internalize this truth, even the most ordinary experiences become extraordinary revelations. Consider how differently you might experience your daily commute if you approached it with the awareness that God has divine appointments scheduled for you along the way, that the person sitting next to you on the subway or the song that comes on the radio might carry a message meant specifically for you in that moment. Imagine how your work might be transformed if you approached each task, each meeting, each challenge is an opportunity to participate in God's creative and redemptive activity in the world. This is not magical thinking or superstition. It's not about seeing supernatural intervention in every coincidence. Rather, it's about developing a contemplative awareness that perceives the deeper currents of meaning flowing beneath the surface of ordinary reality. It's about recognizing, as Ignatius did, that God is constantly communicating through the natural unfolding of life circumstances, if we have the discernment to perceive it. One of the most common objections to this perspective is the problem of suffering and evil. If God is orchestrating the circumstances of our lives, why do terrible things happen? This is a profound question that has challenged theologians and philosophers throughout history, and I won't pretend to offer a simple answer here. What Ignatian spirituality suggests, however, is not that God causes suffering, but that God can work redemptively through even the most painful circumstances if we remain open to divine guidance. Ignatius himself experienced this reality. His physical suffering from his battle wound became the very circumstance that opened him to spiritual transformation. Later, during a period of intense spiritual desolation and temptation to suicide, he persevered and eventually received profound mystical illumination that shaped his understanding of God and spiritual life. His own experience taught him that God can bring light even from the darkest experiences. This doesn't minimize the reality of suffering or suggest that we should passively accept injustice or abuse. Indeed, working for justice and healing is often precisely how we participate in God's redemptive activity in the face of evil. But it does suggest that no circumstance, however painful, is beyond God's capacity to transform for ultimate good and growth. Another common objection concerns the seeming randomness and meaninglessness of many life events. Does God really care about which checkout line I choose at the grocery store, or which route I take to work? The Ignatian answer would be that while not every detail may carry explicit divine guidance, developing the habit of spiritual discernment helps us recognize those moments that do have particular significance. It's like learning to distinguish the meaningful patterns in the static of everyday experience. This relates to a third objection, the concern that such a perspective might lead to analysis paralysis, constantly second-guessing every decision in an attempt to discern God's will. But Ignatian discernment is not meant to be anxiety-inducing. Rather, it offers a path to spiritual freedom, helping us make decisions from a place of inner peace rather than compulsion or fear. The goal is not perfect certainty about God's will in every situation, but a growing sensitivity to divine guidance that becomes more natural and intuitive over time. Ultimately, the Ignatian understanding that God is communicating through the circumstances of our lives offers a middle path between rigid religious determinism on one hand and spiritual aimlessness on the other. It preserves both divine sovereignty and human freedom in creative tension. It acknowledges the reality of randomness and suffering, while insisting that meaning and purpose can be discovered even in the most challenging circumstances. And most importantly, it offers a practical method for discerning how God is actively present and communicating in our everyday experience. So let me return to where we began. The fact that you are hearing these words right now is not a mere coincidence. God has been orchestrating circumstances throughout your life, leading you to this moment for a purpose that is specifically meant for you. That purpose might be a word of encouragement, a challenge to deeper spiritual commitment, an invitation to a new direction, or simply the reassurance that you are not alone, that God is actively engaged in your life. I invite you to take a moment now to reflect on what brought you to this video. What series of circumstances, what inner promptings led you to be listening to these words at this particular moment in your journey? And what resonates with you as you hear them? What stirs within your heart? These reflections may offer clues to how God is speaking to you right now. What divine appointment has been set for you in this moment? If these reflections on finding God in the circumstances of your life have touched something in your heart, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, where we explore together the path toward a deeper and more authentic faith. Each week, we share teachings inspired by Ignatius and other spiritual masters to transform our awareness of God's presence and activity in our everyday lives. You are not alone in seeking a more meaningful engagement with your faith. Many of us are learning to recognize divine appointments in what the world dismisses as mere coincidence. Thank you for sharing this moment of reflection. Your presence here is itself a sign of grace at work in your life. As we conclude, I want to leave you with this thought. The God who orchestrated the circumstances that brought you to this video has been working throughout your entire life. weaving together moments of joy and sorrow, success and failure, connection and loneliness, into a tapestry of meaning and purpose uniquely yours. Every apparent coincidence, every unexpected turn in the road, every seemingly random encounter has been an opportunity for divine communication and guidance. And this God continues to work in your life right now, speaking through your circumstances, inviting you to a deeper awareness of divine presence and purpose. The 20th century Jesuit philosopher and theologian Pierre Teilhard de Chardin wrote, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." When we truly grasp this truth, we realize that nothing in our lives is merely random or meaningless. Everything, even the smallest detail, is potentially sacramental, a bearer of divine presence and purpose. Our task is simply to cultivate the awareness that allows us to recognize God's voice speaking through the ordinary circumstances of our lives. This is the profound gift that Ignatius of Loyola offers us through his spiritual legacy. The understanding that God is constantly communicating through the events and circumstances of our lives transforms everything. It makes each moment an opportunity for divine encounter, each decision an exercise in spiritual discernment, each relationship a potential channel of grace. It infuses the most ordinary experiences with extraordinary significance and purpose. So the next time you experience what the world calls a coincidence, pause and consider. Perhaps it's not a coincidence at all. Perhaps it's a divine appointment, a moment orchestrated by a God who knows you intimately and is actively engaged in every detail of your life. Perhaps it's an invitation to discover the thread of divine purpose that runs through every moment of your existence, connecting past, present, and future in a coherent narrative of meaning and grace. This awareness, this capacity to recognize God's communication through the circumstances of our lives, is available to each of us. It doesn't require special mystical gifts or advanced theological training. It simply requires the willingness to pay attention, to reflect on our experiences with spiritual sensitivity, and to respond with open hearts to the divine invitations we discover there. This is the path of Ignatian spirituality, the way of finding God in all things. And remember, the fact that you found this video, that you listened to these words, that something within them resonated with your soul, is not a coincidence. It's a divine appointment. A moment when God is reaching out to you through the ordinary circumstances of your life to reveal something that no one else knows. Something meant specifically for you in this moment of your journey. The question now is, how will you respond to this divine invitation? The answer to that question may shape not only your day, but your destiny. Your life is not a series of random events. It's a masterfully crafted narrative written by the divine author, who knows the end from the beginning, who weaves meaning even from the most challenging chapters, who specializes in unexpected plot twists that ultimately serve the greater glory of God and your deepest good. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is without purpose. Nothing is merely coincidental. Everything, absolutely everything, is potentially revelatory of divine presence and purpose. This is the extraordinary truth that can transform your ordinary life into a continuous experience of wonder, meaning, and grace. So go forward from this moment with new eyes to see and new ears to hear how God is speaking to you through the circumstances of your life. Be attentive to the divine appointments scheduled throughout your day. Listen for God's voice in the people you meet, the challenges you face, the beauty you encounter, and even the apparent coincidences that surprise you. For as Ignatius discovered nearly 500 years ago, and as countless souls have verified since, God is constantly communicating, constantly guiding, constantly present in every detail of your life. And once you begin to recognize this divine presence and purpose, nothing will ever look the same again. Now I want to share with you something even more profound about this understanding of divine appointment and coincidence. There is an aspect of Ignatian spirituality that takes this awareness to an even deeper level, something that Ignatius himself experienced in a moment of extraordinary mystical illumination on the banks of the Cardona River near Manresa, Spain. After months of intense spiritual struggle, fasting, and prayer, Ignatius had an experience that he later said taught him more than all his subsequent studies and spiritual reading combined. In that moment, he perceived with startling clarity how all of creation is interconnected, how God's presence permeates everything, and how every moment and circumstance is a potential revelation of divine purpose. Ignatius never fully explained the content of this mystical experience, saying that words were inadequate to describe it. But its impact on his spirituality was unmistakable. From that point forward, he approached every person, every situation, every apparent coincidence with a profound awareness of its potential spiritual significance. He developed what we might call a sacramental imagination, the capacity to perceive the divine presence shimmering beneath the surface of ordinary reality. This sacramental imagination is at the heart of what it means to recognize divine appointments in what others dismiss as mere coincidences. It's the ability to perceive the invisible within the visible, the eternal within the temporal, the divine purpose within the seemingly random unfolding of events. And while few of us may experience the kind of dramatic mystical illumination that Ignatius received at the Cardinal, we can all cultivate this sacramental imagination through prayer, reflection, and attentiveness to the movements of the Spirit in our daily lives. The Jesuit poet Gerard Manley Hopkins captured this sacramental vision of reality in his poem God's Grandeur, where he wrote that, "The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out, like shining from shook foil." Hopkins recognized what Ignatius had discovered centuries earlier, that divine presence and purpose are not abstract concepts, but living realities that manifest in the concrete details of our existence. Every moment, every encounter, every apparent coincidence carries the potential to reveal something of God's nature and intention, if we have eyes to see and ears to hear. This understanding transforms how we experience time itself. Most of us live with a linear, sequential understanding of time, perceiving our lives as a series of discrete moments strung together like beads on a string. But the Ignatian perspective invites us to a more integrated awareness, where past, present, and future are interconnected in a coherent narrative of divine purpose. What seems like a random coincidence in this moment may reveal itself as the fulfillment of a pattern set in motion years ago, or the preparation for a purpose that will only become clear in the future. Consider the story of the disciples on the road to Emmaus after the crucifixion. They encounter a stranger who explains the scriptures to them, and only later, in the breaking of bread, do they recognize that it was the risen Christ who had been walking with them all along. This story perfectly illustrates the Ignatian understanding of divine appointments. What appeared to be a chance encounter with a fellow traveler was in fact a divine appointment, a moment of revelation and transformation. And like those disciples, we often only recognize the true significance of these moments in retrospect, when we look back and see how God was present and active, even when we failed to perceive it in the moment. This brings us to another crucial aspect of Ignatian spirituality, the practice of the exam, which I mentioned earlier but want to explore more fully now. The exam is a daily prayer practice that helps us develop the capacity to recognize divine appointments and coincidences by training us to notice where God has been active in our day. Typically practiced in the evening, the examen invites us to review the events of the day in God's presence, noticing moments of consolation and desolation, recognizing where we experienced God's guidance and where we may have missed or resisted it. Let me walk you through a simple version of this practice that you might incorporate into your own spiritual routine. Begin by quieting yourself and becoming aware of God's loving presence with you. Then, express gratitude for the specific gifts and blessings of the day. Next, ask the Holy Spirit to help you see your day with divine clarity, to recognize where God was present and active even if you didn't notice it at the time. Then review your day chronologically, paying particular attention to your feelings and internal responses to different situations and encounters. Where did you experience consolation, a sense of peace, joy, courage, or connection? Where did you feel desolation, anxiety, fear, confusion, or isolation? These emotional and spiritual responses often provide clues to where God was speaking to you through the circumstances of your day. Pay special attention to what might have seemed like coincidences, unexpected encounters, surprising opportunities, or unusual impressions. Ask yourself, could this have been a divine appointment? What might God have been communicating to me through this circumstance? Then conclude by expressing gratitude for the ways God has been present and active in your day, asking forgiveness for the times you may have missed or resisted divine guidance, and looking forward with hope to how God will continue to work in your life tomorrow. This simple daily practice gradually transforms our awareness, training us to recognize divine appointments not just in retrospect, but in real time. It's like developing a spiritual muscle, strengthening our capacity to perceive God's presence and communication in the ordinary unfolding of our daily lives. And as this awareness grows, what once seemed like random coincidences increasingly reveal themselves as meaningful divine appointments, moments when God is reaching out to us through the fabric of ordinary reality. Now, you might be wondering, how does this understanding of divine appointments and coincidences relate to the specific theme of our video? The idea that God brought you here to reveal something that no one else knows. This brings us to another profound aspect of Ignatian spirituality, the deeply personal nature of God's communication with each individual soul. Ignatius emphasized that God deals directly with each person, speaking to the unique circumstances, needs, and capacities of every individual. While there are certainly universal spiritual truths that apply to all believers, the way God communicates these truths and the specific invitations God extends are uniquely tailored to each person's spiritual journey. What God wants to reveal to you in this moment, through the apparent coincidence that brought you to this video, is something specifically meant for you, something that addresses your particular spiritual needs, questions, or longings in this season of your life. This is why Ignatius insisted that the role of a spiritual guide is not to impose predetermined answers or generic spiritual formulas, but to help individuals discern how God is already communicating with them through their own experiences, feelings, and circumstances. The spiritual director doesn't stand between the soul and God, but helps the person recognize and respond to the divine communication that is already taking place. This understanding challenges the common tendency to compare our spiritual journey with others, or to assume that God must work in our lives exactly as He has worked in someone else's. The divine appointment that brought you to this video, the revelation that God wants to share with you right now, is uniquely yours. It may resonate with universal spiritual principles, but the specific application, the particular invitation, the personal revelation, is tailored specifically for your soul in this moment of your journey. To help you discern what this might be, let me suggest a simple exercise. Take a moment to quiet your mind and heart. Become aware of God's loving presence with you right now. Then reflect on these questions, not rushing to answer, but allowing space for intuition and spiritual sensitivity to emerge. What circumstances, what series of events led you to this video at this particular moment? Was there a specific question, longing, or concern in your heart that prompted you to click on this content? As you've been listening, what has resonated most deeply with you? What words, ideas, or images have stirred something in your spirit? What emotions have you experienced? What insights or realizations have emerged? These reflections may offer clues to what God is seeking to reveal to you through this divine appointment, this moment that the world would dismiss as mere coincidence, but which faith recognizes as a sacred opportunity for divine communication. The answer may not come immediately or dramatically. It might unfold gradually over time as you continue to reflect on this experience. But trust that God has indeed brought you to this moment for a purpose, to reveal something specifically meant for you. This brings us to another important aspect of Ignatian spirituality, the principle of holy indifference or spiritual freedom. Ignatius recognized that our preconceptions, attachments, and agendas can often prevent us from recognizing divine appointments or hearing what God is communicating through them. If we approach our spiritual journey with rigid expectations of how God should work or what God should say, we may miss the unexpected ways that divine guidance manifests in our lives. Holy indifference doesn't mean apathy or lack of care. Rather, it refers to a state of interior freedom where we are not attached to any particular outcome except God's will. It's a willingness to be surprised by God, to recognize that divine communication often comes in unexpected ways, through unexpected channels, revealing unexpected truths. This spiritual freedom allows us to perceive divine appointments that don't conform to our preconceived notions of how God should work in our lives. Consider Ignatius's own experience. When he set out on his spiritual journey after his conversion, he had romantic notions of extreme asceticism and dramatic spiritual heroics. He imagined himself following in the footsteps of great saints like Dominic and Francis, through spectacular feats of self-denial and missionary zeal. But God gradually redirected him toward a different kind of spirituality, one that emphasized finding God in ordinary circumstances, discerning divine purpose in everyday decisions, and serving God through practical engagement with the world, rather than withdrawal from it. If Ignatius had clung rigidly to his initial expectations of how God should work in his life, he might have missed this divine redirection. but his growing spiritual freedom allowed him to recognize and respond to God's unexpected guidance through various circumstances and encounters that others might have dismissed as coincidental. This same spiritual freedom can help us recognize the divine appointments in our own lives, even when they don't match our expectations of how God should communicate with us. This relates to another crucial aspect of Ignatian spirituality, the principle of finding God in all things. Ignatius understood that divine communication is not limited to obviously religious contexts or experiences. God speaks through nature, through work, through relationships, through culture, through the full range of human experience. Every circumstance, every encounter, every apparent coincidence has the potential to reveal something of God's nature and purpose. This means that the divine appointment that brought you to this video is not isolated from the rest of your life. It's connected to what came before and what will come after. Part of a coherent narrative of divine communication that weaves through every aspect of your existence. The revelation that God wants to share with you in this moment will likely connect with other ways God has been speaking to you through various circumstances of your life. Take a moment to consider the patterns of your recent experience. Have there been recurring themes, similar messages coming through different channels, persistent questions or insights arising in various contexts? These patterns often provide clues to what God is seeking to communicate through multiple divine appointments that the world would dismiss as unrelated coincidences. This awareness that God is constantly communicating through the circumstances of our lives is not meant to be a burden or source of anxiety, a pressure to interpret every detail correctly or fear missing divine guidance. Rather, it's an invitation to a more meaningful, more purposeful engagement with reality, a way of experiencing life as an ongoing conversation with the divine. It's a recognition that we are never alone, never abandoned to random chance or meaningless existence, but always held within a greater narrative of purpose and grace. The 20th century Jewish philosopher Martin Buber described two fundamental ways of relating to reality, what he called I-it and I-thou relationships. In I-it relationships, we approach people, circumstances, and experiences as objects, things to be used, manipulated, or managed. In I-thou relationships, we encounter reality as presence, as an opportunity for genuine dialogue and communion. The Ignatian understanding of divine appointments invites us to move from an I-it to an I-thou relationship with our circumstances, to experience them not as meaningless objects or random occurrences, but as opportunities for dialogue with the divine, moments pregnant with presence and purpose. This shift in perspective transforms how we approach every aspect of our lives. Work becomes more than a means of earning a living. It becomes a context for divine encounter and participation in God's creative activity. Relationships become more than sources of pleasure or utility. They become channels of grace and revelation. Challenges become more than problems to be solved. They become invitations to growth and discovery. Even apparent coincidences become meaningful divine appointments, moments when God is reaching out to us through the fabric of ordinary reality to reveal something specifically meant for us in that moment of our journey. This doesn't mean that every detail of our lives is predetermined, or that God micromanages every circumstance. Rather, it suggests that God is infinitely creative in weaving meaning and purpose, even through the random and chaotic aspects of human existence. It acknowledges the reality of chance and contingency, while insisting that nothing is ultimately meaningless or beyond God's capacity to incorporate into a larger narrative of purpose and grace. As we draw toward the conclusion of our time together, I want to emphasize that the awareness of divine appointments and coincidences that we've been exploring is not just a nice spiritual theory. It's a practical, transformative way of engaging with reality that can change how you experience every moment of your life. It's an invitation to live with greater attentiveness, deeper meaning, and more authentic purpose. So what concrete steps can you take to develop this awareness in your daily life? First, incorporate the practice of the exam that we discussed earlier. This simple daily reflection gradually trains your spiritual sensitivity, helping you recognize divine presence and communication in the ordinary circumstances of your life. Second, cultivate what we might call holy curiosity, a willingness to ask what God might be communicating through various situations and encounters, rather than dismissing them as random or meaningless. Third, practice holy indifference or spiritual freedom, letting go of rigid expectations about how God should work in your life and remaining open to unexpected forms of divine guidance. Fourth, engage with a community of spiritual seekers who share this awareness, people with whom you can discuss and discern the potential divine appointments in your life. And finally, trust the process. The capacity to recognize God's communication through the circumstances of your life develops gradually over time through faithful attention and practice. Remember, the fact that you are hearing these words right now is not a coincidence. God has orchestrated circumstances throughout your life to bring you to this moment for a purpose specifically meant for you. That purpose might be a word of encouragement, a challenge to deeper spiritual commitment, an invitation to a new direction, or simply the reassurance that you are not alone, that God is actively engaged in your life. The divine appointment that brought you to this video is part of a larger narrative of purpose and grace that encompasses your entire existence. Every apparent coincidence, every unexpected turn in the road, every seemingly random encounter has been an opportunity for divine communication and guidance. And this God who has been working throughout your past and present continues to work in your future, weaving together all the circumstances of your life into a tapestry of meaning and purpose uniquely yours. As we come to the end of our time together, I want to invite you to take one more moment for reflection. What is the most significant insight or realization that has emerged for you during this video? What might God be revealing to you through this divine appointment? How might you respond to this invitation? If these reflections on finding God in the circumstances of your life have touched something in your heart, I invite you to subscribe to this channel where we explore together the path toward a deeper and more authentic faith. Each week we share teachings inspired by Ignatius and other spiritual masters to transform our awareness of God's presence and activity in our everyday lives. You are not alone in seeking a more meaningful engagement with your faith. Many of us are learning to recognize divine appointments in what the world dismisses as mere coincidence. Thank you for sharing this moment of reflection. Your presence here is itself a sign of grace at work in your life. The God who orchestrated the circumstances that brought you to this video has been working throughout your entire life, weaving together moments of joy and sorrow, success and failure, connection and loneliness, into a tapestry of meaning and purpose uniquely yours. Every apparent coincidence, every unexpected turn in the road, every seemingly random encounter has been an opportunity for divine communication and guidance. And this God continues to work in your life right now, speaking through your circumstances, inviting you to a deeper awareness of divine presence and purpose. The 20th century Jesuit philosopher and theologian Pierre Teilhard de Chardin wrote, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." When we truly grasp this truth, we realize that nothing in our lives is merely random or meaningless. Everything, even the smallest detail, is potentially sacramental, a bearer of divine presence and purpose. Our task is simply to cultivate the awareness that allows us to recognize God's voice speaking through the ordinary circumstances of our lives. This is the profound gift that Ignatius of Loyola offers us through his spiritual legacy. The understanding that God is constantly communicating through the events and circumstances of our lives transforms everything. It makes each moment an opportunity for divine encounter, each decision an exercise in spiritual discernment, each relationship a potential channel of grace. It infuses the most ordinary experiences with extraordinary significance and purpose. So the next time you experience what the world calls a coincidence, pause and consider. Perhaps it's not a coincidence at all. Perhaps it's a divine appointment, a moment orchestrated by a God who knows you intimately and is actively engaged in every detail of your life. Perhaps it's an invitation to discover the thread of divine purpose that runs through every moment of your existence, connecting past, present, and future in a coherent narrative of meaning and grace. This awareness, this capacity to recognize God's communication through the circumstances of our lives, is available to each of us. It doesn't require special mystical gifts or advanced theological training. It simply requires the willingness to pay attention, to reflect on our experiences with spiritual sensitivity, and to respond with open hearts to the divine invitations we discover there. This is the path of Ignatian spirituality, the way of finding God in all things. And remember, the fact that you found this video, that you listened to these words, that something within them resonated with your soul, is not a coincidence. It's a divine appointment, A moment when God is reaching out to you through the ordinary circumstances of your life to reveal something that no one else knows. Something meant specifically for you in this moment of your journey. The question now is, how will you respond to this divine invitation? The answer to that question may shape not only your day, but your destiny. Your life is not a series of random events. It's a masterfully crafted narrative written by the divine author, who knows the end from the beginning, who weaves meaning even from the most challenging chapters, who specializes in unexpected plot twists that ultimately serve the greater glory of God and your deepest good. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is without purpose. Nothing is merely coincidental. Everything, absolutely everything, is potentially revelatory of divine presence and purpose. This is the extraordinary truth that can transform your ordinary life into a continuous experience of wonder, meaning, and grace. So go forward from this moment with new eyes to see and new ears to hear how God is speaking to you through the circumstances of your life. Be attentive to the divine appointments scheduled throughout your day. Listen for God's voice in the people you meet, the challenges you face, the beauty you encounter, and even the apparent coincidences that surprise you. For as Ignatius discovered nearly 500 years ago, and as countless souls have verified since, God is constantly communicating, constantly guiding, constantly present in every detail of your life. And once you begin to recognize this divine presence and purpose, nothing will ever look the same again.